welcome in everybody to my first roster review of the 2022 CFL season with a look into the Calgary Stampeders, a team that I would say I'm much higher on compared to most people around the CFL. But really quickly before we get started, if you want to support the channel, as always, be sure to hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It takes a long time to make these videos and it makes it all worth it in the end. And with that said, let's get on with the video. Now, of course, before I get into the agenda here, as I'm recording this, there is a potential for a player strike in the CFL, so hopefully that's resolved by the time you're watching this video. But to start off today, we're going to be talking about the Stamps 2022 recap, going over what happened last year, the coaching staff that they're going to be bringing in this year, and then the meat of the video is really going to be the 2022 positional rankings, where we look at every position on this team, how it stacks up against the rest of the CFL. And then we're going to go into the starting lineups, trying to piece together, because depth charts in the CFL are very unreliable. We're just going to try to piece that together. And then we're going to go into my team award predictions and then finish off with a key storyline. So with that said, let's get on to the recap. So the Stamps finished 8-6 last season, but honestly, that's probably the worst season, regular season-wise, that I've seen them have in a long time. They started the season dreadfully at 2-5, and it really did look like it was kind of the end of their run in terms of being this dominant regular season team. But then they really got hot down the stretch as Bo Levi Mitchell started to get more healthy, defense started to play really well, and then unfortunately they lose to Saskatchewan in the West semifinal in an absolute classic in overtime. So could have went either way. I think overall it's definitely not the worst that season could have gone last year. And with that in mind, let's talk about their coaching staff going into this season, and starting with head coach Dave Dickinson, who has a 61-23-2 career record in the CFL, one of the better offensive minds, played quarterback at such a high level in the CFL, so he really understands the game, and I'm really interested to see how he attacks defenses now with all the rule changes that happen now with the CFL this offseason. And then joining him on the staff is offensive coordinator Pat Delmonico, defensive coordinator Brent Molson, and then special teams coordinator Mark Kylam, who is a potential head coaching candidate in the next few years here. So overall, really good staff coming to this season for the Calgary Stampeders. And let's talk about the first positional ranking, which is going to be quarterback, which is going to come in at second here. And we'll start with Bo Levi Mitchell, who is the league's current most decorated quarterback. He has struggled with nagging injuries that have affected his on-field play the last few seasons. However, after watching his film from 2021, I still believe there's a good quarterback in there. For example, I think he's still capable of hitting those high difficult throws down the field, something we saw down the stretch last season as his play slowly started to improve. When it comes to Mitchell, his confidence is always going to be his biggest asset, not afraid to test the defense in all areas of the field. Unfortunately, he has dealt with multiple injuries to his throwing shoulder as well as a fractured leg last season, which is obviously incredibly concerning going forward. Mitchell is a guy that cannot afford to lose a step from a mobility standpoint. He really provides little value as it is in terms of his play extension ability. 2022 could be a huge turning point in his career, now at 32 years old, and I'm just really interested to see what he can do this season, if it's going to be a big bounce back, is it going to be more of the same. But the reason why I'm not too concerned and why I still rank this team second in terms of quarterback rooms around the CFL is mostly because of the backup here, Jake Maier, who I thought looked excellent in a few starts last season. He showed really good pocket sense and throws a very, very catchable football. He shows good touch and reads defenses at an impressive rate for a true rookie quarterback at the CFL level. I was just really, really impressed with Jake Maier and what he was able to do, especially that start against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, which they arguably should have won, by the way. So honestly, what an impressive rookie debut for Jake Maier, and I think they have a really good succession plan if Bo Levi Mitchell really continues to struggle this season. And then the final two guys here are rookies. Chase Forcade played his football at Nicholls State, and then Tommy Stevens, who was a former 7th-round NFL draft pick by the New Orleans Saints, come into camp here, and I'm really excited to see if either of those guys can really factor into this quarterback room at all. Now moving on to running back, which is going to come in at 4th here in the CFL, and we're just going to talk about Kadeem Carey to start off here. Carey is really a fearless running back that embraces contact. He was one of the CFL's 2021 breakout stars. He has elite burst and athleticism for a CFL starter at running back and should be a bell cow in the run game and a major factor while catching screen passes, as Calgary likes to do. So expect Calgary to really lean on him heavily as we go forward. They really did last season. I really thought he was their most complete offensive player on a week-to-week basis last year. So just a great breakout last year for Carey. Let's see if he can keep that going. And then William Longley, a longtime special teamer that has been with the Stamps since 2014, hasn't really competed in a offensive role too much, just basically as a fullback. But like I said, most of his contributions coming on special teams. Charlie Power, much of the same. I mean, he's seen a little bit more action, I believe, in terms of seeing the occasional carry here or there, but honestly, mostly just a special teams guy. And then Elliott Graham, the team's 4th round pick from 2021, who appeared in 7 games in his rookie season. We'll see if there's anything there. And then another 7th round pick, Caden Johnson, who was actually cut by the BC Lions in training camp last season, was a former draft pick of them. So we'll see if he can make an impact. I remember really liking his special teams potential coming out of the 2020 draft because he's such a big guy. I don't think he's ever going to be starting caliber running back in the league, but I think he could be a really good special teams and fullback type. So those are the guys with experience in the running back room. Not too much notable in terms of guys that have actually carried the ball in CFL games other than Kadeem Carey, who's an absolute stud who carries this ranking up here. But now I'm going to talk about the rookies, which I've done a little bit different this year. I'm just splitting it up, really. The first guy I want to talk to you about is Rashid Tucker, who was a mid-round pick in this year's draft. Probably the fastest running back in this year's draft class, so we'll see if he can, contribute here. I don't know if he's really a fit in terms of special teams, which is, I think, why he may have fell a little bit in the draft despite his pretty good athleticism. And then you got Nico Leonard, who was a global out of South Africa, who was originally acquired in 2021. We'll see if he's the global or two that makes the roster here. Ivory Kelly Martin, who played his college football for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And then finally, Dietrich Mills, who played his college football at Nebraska. So 2 Big Ten players here in the backfield for the Stampeders, and we'll see if any of these guys can make a difference. And like I said, with Carey really being the only guy that's been experienced at carrying the ball on the CFL field, I think one of these guys could easily make an impact this season. Now moving on to the wide receivers, which are surprisingly going to come in at 6th here in the CFL. And it's not that I don't love the top end of this receiving core, it's mostly just the surrounding pieces of the top 2 targets. So we're going to start with Reggie Begelton, a superstar all-around receiver that brings upside in several ways. Begelton has the ability to both threaten the defense down the field with his long speed, but also creates yards after the catch on routes underneath. His incredible chemistry with Bo Levi Mitchell, which didn't miss a beat after Begelton returned to the team late last season, and I think that's just a crucial point to remember. Last year, they didn't have Begelton to begin the season. I think having Begelton the whole season could make a huge difference for Mitchell this year. I think he is, in my mind, the best receiver in the CFL, and he brings that great all-around skill set that you really desire in a number 1 receiver. And then, right next to him is Kamar Jordan, who is an excellent receiver in his own right. He's a unique athlete for a CFL receiver. He possesses great size and speed to gain separation on a wide variety of routes. When healthy, Jordan is one of the biggest game changers in the league at the wide receiver position. He's just this big physical guy that can win contested catches, any kind of pass you want to throw to him. But unfortunately, Jordan has struggled with multiple injuries the past couple of seasons, including 2021. But still, if he and Begelton are healthy, I think this is the best wide receiver duo in the CFL going into this season. And then, like I said, I have questions about the depth guys here, starting with Jordan Williams-Lambert, a former CFL Rookie of the Year nominee with the Rough Riders in 2018. Williams-Lambert has struggled to reestablish himself after coming back to the CFL from an NFL stint in 2019. He played only 4 games in 2021 with Saskatchewan before suffering a season-ending injury. At his best, he is a bigger body physical guy that you can use in the slot, and obviously has that pedigree winning a nomination for Rookie of the Year. So, I think he could be that 3rd receiver in this receiving core if he stays healthy, if he can get back to what he showed in 2018. But it's 2022, we're getting pretty far removed from that. So there's a lot of questions there. And then Colton Hunchak, a Canadian receiver. He's a third-year guy who was selected with the last pick in the 2019 CFL draft out of York University. And due to his smaller stature, his ideal spot really is in the slot, in my opinion. He's a good route runner. He's become a good contributor to his first 2 CFL seasons, but remains to be seen whether or not he's going to really take it and run with it and become a full-time starting receiver in the CFL. And then Richie Sindani's kind of a little bit of the opposite of him. He's a veteran Canadian receiver who offers, a solid floor of production, but really low upside in my opinion. He's not going to be a guy that will win a lot of contested catches and get yards after the catch, but he's a little bit of a bigger receiver than Hunchak. He's a guy that the Stampeders have really relied on the last few years. They feel very comfortable using him in the starting lineup, but he just doesn't offer that great upside in my opinion. And then a guy that I'm really high on, Luther Hakunavanu. He's a raw, talented second-year player who was able to produce in limited opportunities in 2021, including making a handful of big plays down the field. He seemed to have great chemistry with Bo Levi Mitchell right off the bat, and that really bodes well for him in training camp competition for a starting spot, which is going to be really, really interesting, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And then these last handful of guys that have appeared in CFL games but haven't really done too much things that are notable. Sean Bain is probably the most notable of all of them. He had a few catches last season in one particular game. I believe it was against Saskatchewan, and he looked pretty good, but he really didn't do anything else besides that the rest of the season. So we'll see if anything comes of that really small sample size. Malik Henry, a second-year player who mostly featured as a returner in year 1. He's very athletic but raw when given opportunities on offense. At least that's from what I've seen. And then Nick Hawley, he's the brother of former most outstanding rookie Nate Hawley, who was a great player for the Stampeders back in 2019. Nick had double-digit receptions his rookie year, but really is just a candidate to compete for a starting spot this year, I think. And then Tyson Middlemost, a Canadian receiver who's going into his second year, who played 2021 basically all on special teams. Middlemost was Calgary's 4th round pick in the 2020 CFL draft. And then finally we have global Andres Salgado, who is originally from Mexico. Salgado has been on and off of the Stampeders roster the past couple of seasons, including 15 appearances with the team in 2019. So we'll see if he ever contributes really from an offensive standpoint on this roster. Now that we've covered the veterans, now let's talk about the rookies that the Stampeders are bringing to camp from the wide receiver position. Starting with this year's first-round pick, Jalen Philpott out of the University of Calgary. He was one of the most prolific receivers the U Sports level has seen in years, and was really seen as a very polished receiver, can run the waggle, has really good route running ability. So I think he could be a potential early contributor to this team this year. And then Felton Davis III, a 6'3" receiver who played his college football at Michigan State, a Big Ten guy, a trio of Big Ten guys we've talked about already when only on the offense. And then Devontrez Dukes, who was briefly on the Denver Broncos after having a breakout senior season with the University of Florida. Reese Horn is an interesting guy here. He's a professional football journeyman. Horn played games in the AAF, the Alliance of American Football, the Spring League, and the XFL, as well as becoming a star in Europe over in Italy. So very interesting guy. I think he's a guy that's probably going to make this roster because he has so much pro experience. And then Brandon Langley, a former 3rd round pick in the NFL by the Denver Broncos. Langley originally entered the NFL as a defensive back before making the change to wide receiver during his NFL career. So we'll see if he factors in on defense. The wide receiving core is listed as a wide receiver here on the Stampeders roster, but we'll see if he can contribute to this team this year. Now moving on to the offensive line, which is going to come in at second here in the CFL, and I just really like this unit. It has a good combination of veterans and guys that are on the come up. Starting with Derek Dennis at left tackle. He missed all of last season due to a contract dispute with Edmonton, but when he's on the field, he's one of the best tackles and really a game-changing offensive lineman in the CFL. He has an impressive career resume that includes a Most Outstanding Offensive Lineman award. Honestly, coming back to Calgary here could make all the difference here for Dennis. And then Zach Williams, a young guard who really came into his own last season as a starter. Williams still needs to clean up some of his pass blocking footwork from what I've seen, and that's really where the problem areas really showed up for him. But he's a very physical guard with good play strength, and I think he has the potential to really become a very good plus starter in this league on the offensive line at that left guard position. And then Sean McEwen, who is an elite pass blocker who excels at getting to the second level in the run game. He has arguably developed into the league's best center, in my opinion. McEwen is also one of the league's best offensive linemen while operating on the move in the screen game, and I'm just super impressed with what he was able to do coming from Toronto, where he was already an established guy, coming back home out west to Calgary, and really didn't miss a beat and was even better than he was in Toronto. So he is my highest rated center going into this season. And then Ryan Sevier, one of the more underrated offensive linemen in the CFL, in my opinion. He has quietly occupied Calgary's right guard position while playing at a high level the past couple of seasons. What really impresses me about Sevier is his overall movement for his size. He teams up with McEwen to create a dynamic duo when used on screens that the Stamps like to deploy quite often, as I mentioned when I was talking about Kadeem Carey. So overall, I really like Sevier's game. I think he's one of the most underrated linemen in the CFL. And then Julian Goodjones, a very interesting and promising starter at right tackle. Injuries derailed what could have been a great debut season for him in 2021. Goodjones is a big, long, and physical tackle who also displays the agility required to play the position. Let's see if he can stay healthy this season, which is really the only key, I believe, for him. I think he already showed he could play at a decent level at the CFL level, so I'm excited to see what he can do if he can put it all together. So those 5 guys, I'm very confident those are going to be your 5 starters for the Stamps this season on the offensive line. But then you also got a really good 6th offensive lineman here with Bryce Bell, who in his first year in the league was pressed into the starting lineup at times and really held his own out there. He will still need to improve his overall play strength to become a full-time CFL starter, but it looks like Calgary may have found something with their 2021 second-round pick. So I think those are really the core 6 guys you're talking about on the offensive line this year for the Stampeders. Now let's look at the rookies they're bringing to camp at the position, starting with Jacob Butler and Joel Braden. Joel Braden, I was just reading before I put this video together that he is probably going to retire. He was placed on the retired list by the Stampeders, so he's unfortunately as a rookie not going to be joining the team at camp. But you have Jacob Butler, who was a 4th round pick out of Queens in this most recent draft. He struggled during the one-on-ones at the combine, probably more than any lineman that I saw, but was a very highly regarded prospect otherwise. And then Joshua Coker, an American here, has been around the Stampeders organization since 2020, but has yet to dress for a game, spending majority of the time on the practice roster last year. And then Carter Como, another Canadian here, a 350-pound lineman out of the University of Calgary. He spent some time on the team's practice roster in 2021. Maybe they're trying to get another Ryan Sevier, another bigger body type to develop there at guard. And then Keno Banks, a global here, a native of the UK. He stands at 6'6", 308 pounds, and previously played in multiple leagues across Europe, so has a lot of pro experience, just not here over in North America. And then Josh Mosley, an undrafted rookie out of Queens who played 5 seasons for the Gales. We'll see if there's anything there. And then the most notable guy here is actually Hugh Thornton, who's right at the bottom here, a longtime NFL veteran. He originally went pro in 2013 when he was selected by the Indianapolis Colts in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. He was a regular starter in the NFL for multiple years, but opted for early retirement from the NFL in 2017. He made a comeback in 2019 in the Alliance of American Football, and his most recent pro football appearance was a training camp stint with the Washington football team in 2019. An interesting career to say the least, and we'll see if he gets it back on track here with the Stampeders. So overall, an interesting group of rookies coming to camp on the offensive line. Now talking about the defensive line. So we're going to start here with Mike Rose, who, in my opinion, is the most dominant interior pass rusher in the CFL right now. He wins in a number of ways, but what I really think separates him from other interior pass rushers in the league is his quickness and get off at the snap. You combine that with an ability to split double teams, and you have a true difference-making player in Mike Rose. He isn't the greatest run defender in the world, but his electric pass rush ability more than makes up for that, in my opinion. And like I said, I think he's among the handful of most impactful defensive linemen in the CFL today. He's joined by veteran edge rusher Sean Lemon. You just know what to expect from him on a game-to-game basis. He is good for just about 10 sacks every season as a great speed rusher off the edge. However, he is definitely not the best run defender in the world and sometimes can lack physicality. Lemon is a player with both clear strengths and flaws, which is probably why he has bounced around the league as much as he has, despite his consistent production. And then you got Canadian veteran Derek Wigan, who is another veteran along this defensive line. Wigan has long provided high-level play as a Canadian starter for Calgary. Well, he's not the type of guy who I think is going to come out and make a whole bunch of flashy plays. He is a stout run defender who has a high motor, and that's really what you're going to ask of him. He's occasionally going to flash a little bit of pass rush ability, but he's just not going to be that dominant player on a game-to-game basis that's really going to stand out to you. But he's going to do his job, command double teams, do the dirty work, and let Rose really be that dominant pass rusher from the inside. And then a really interesting player, another Canadian here, Isaac Ademi Berglund, the team's first-round pick from 2020, who flashed potential in a rotational role in year one. Even though I didn't have a YouTube channel at the time, he was my favorite player in the 2020 draft. I expect him to be used as a starter off the edge in his second season, where he can show off his good speed and mix of power. So I'm really interested to see what he can do this season. I don't know if he necessarily starts. I will talk about that more in a minute, but honestly, I think he has all the potential in the world from a size and athleticism standpoint, and the fact that he was seeing a lot of opportunities right away as a rookie last year is a really good sign. And then Folaren Aro-Malati, a veteran defensive end who has started games for the Stampeders across the last 3 seasons, but has struggled to stay on the field due to injuries, unfortunately. It's hard to expect him to be a major breakout star this far into his career, but he's a solid veteran that the Stamps really know well. And then Stephen Banks, who broke out with a massive 3-sack performance against Edmonton last season, but after that, really only recorded 1 sack the rest of the games that he played last year and really was invisible. Other than that, kind of just a flash in the pan. We'll see if he can get back on track and really establish himself as a full-time guy this season. Connor McGuff, a guy that I believe did not play last year. He's a versatile Canadian who has starting experience and versatility. A useful player for the Stamps given the ratio situation with 2 Canadian starters potentially on the defensive line. He's a guy that can potentially play both positions, especially on that interior with Wigan. So I think he is a good player to bring to camp for the Stampeders. And then these rest of these guys are very, very inexperienced, but I think there's some stuff to say about them. You got Casanova McKenzie, a pro football journeyman who played college football at Auburn. McKenzie was brought in by the Stamps in 2021, where he played in only 1 game. Silas Stewart, a second-year player with positional versatility. He was an impactful player on special teams last year. And then Uric Bethune, who appeared in 7 games last season, and it was productive on special teams. And then you have the 2 Canadian guys here at the bottom with Elaine Pay and Andrew Seenan Spalding. Elaine Pay, who is a second-round pick in 2020 by Edmonton. He was an older player when he was selected coming out of Ottawa and quickly fell out of favor after only appearing in 1 game in Edmonton. Just not a good sign and arguably one of the worst picks already from that 2020 draft. He looks to have a fresh start here in Calgary, where he has the opportunity to compete for that backup spot. And then Seenan Spalding, who is a rotational player as a rookie last year. He was selected by the Stampeders in the 6th round of the 2020 draft. So overall, the things to watch with this defensive line, I believe, are the backups here behind the Canadian starters, Lane Pay, Andrew Seenan Spalding. Where do they provide value to this team? But I think I'm very confident in terms of the top end of this defensive line room, obviously with Mike Rose, Lemon, a very consistent veteran pass rusher. I think you have a lot of good stuff here for the Calgary Stampeders. And then looking at their defensive line rookies, we're starting with Terrell McLean, who's the most notable of this group. In his NFL career, he has 133 tackles and 7.5 sacks, so we'll see what he can do going forward and if he makes this roster at an old age. I think the Stampeders usually like those more experienced guys that have NFL experience, so we'll see what they can do here. And then I'm not even going to try to pronounce Pia's name here, a global guy from New Zealand who spent time on both the Elks and Stampeders practice rosters last year, but hasn't played in the CFL game yet. And then Nick Devonzo, a former indoor football league player who played his college football at New Mexico. Stacy Keeley, was in training camp with the Tiger Cats last year, but was cut. And then George Obina, most recently with the Atlanta Falcons at the beginning of 2021. And then the last two guys here, Shaq Smith, played his college football at Maryland, another big school here. And then finally, Jonathan Valoga, a player with multiple NFL stops, including regular season appearances for the Lions and 49ers. So an interesting group of rookies, to say the least, coming to the defensive line room for the Stampeders. Now at linebacker, they're going to rank third in the CFL, and I really like this group, honestly. Starting with Jameer Thurman, who I think is one of the most versatile linebackers in all of the CFL, especially from a coverage standpoint. Thurman has exceptional range and instincts in zone coverage, often disrupting passing lanes. He is also incredibly physical when playing the run from his weak side linebacker position. Overall, one of the best linebackers in the CFL in my opinion, and like I said, one of the most impactful coverage guys from that position in the league. And then the really interesting one is Cameron Judge here, a former Most Outstanding Canadian nominee who had a really tough 2021 season in Toronto that included injuries and poor play. When at his best, he is arguably the best Canadian linebacker in the league, with ability to play plus coverage and play physically at the line of scrimmage. But will we get the 2019 version of Cameron Judge from the Saskatchewan Roughriders, or will we get the 2021 version from the Toronto Argonauts? That is a big question, but I think Calgary's in a good position to get the most out of him here. And then Brandon Dozier, who is a Swiss Army knife player of sorts. He's a capable safety, but he is an even better strong side linebacker, allowing him to play closer to the line of scrimmage where he can take advantage of his physicality. It is also worth mentioning that he is one of the league's best special teams players. Seriously, that guy was a menace last year. He was just there every time Calgary punted the ball down the field. Speaking of that, Fraser Sopik, another great special teams player. He's a third-year player out of Western who has slowly started to carve out more of a role on defense after originally being a valuable special teams player. Sopik was a fourth-round pick in 2019 by Calgary. And then these other guys, I think most of them are just going to try to battle for backup spots or play special teams roles. Charlie Moore, another young player who mostly featured on special teams. Moore was the team's third-round pick in 2021. DJ Lalama, a veteran with some starting experience. He is likely the favorite to back up Judge, but Sopik will probably have something to say about that. And then Curtis Gray, who is a former fourth-round pick out of Waterloo, a program that's produced a lot of CFL players in recent years, a little bit of resurgence there. And then Brad Cowan, who played in games with Calgary and Ottawa last season, but I don't know too much about him there. But those are the guys with experience in the linebacking corps for the Stampeders coming to camp. And then going into the rookies, I think it's an interesting group of rookies, starting with Josiah Shackle, who is the team's second-round pick out of the University of Alberta. He was the 2021 U Sports Defensive Player of the Year, so we'll see if that translates into the CFL in the next couple of seasons. It's going to be a guy that's going to be an impact special teamer right away, but we'll see how long it takes him to really carve out a role in the starting lineup. It's kind of Cameron Judge insurance. I think if he doesn't bounce back, you have a good, bright young prospect to plug in there in the next year or so in Shackle. And then Ryan Gomes, a global out of Brazil, who was selected by the Stampeders in the second round of the global draft this year. So we'll see if he is one of the globals that makes the roster here. And then Perry Young has been around the Stampeders since 2020, but hasn't appeared in a game. He played at the University of Cincinnati for college football. And then Trey Matthews, he was a college safety at Auburn who had a few offseason stops in the NFL. So this is classic guy that was a bigger defensive back in the NFL, but is more of a linebacker here in the CFL. So it's going to be really interesting to see if he can make the roster here. But again, a really interesting group of linebackers from a rookie perspective coming to camp for the Stampeders. Now going on to the defensive back room, which is going to rank 7th in the CFL, and I believe this is the lowest ranking that I have of the Stampeders in these positional rankings. And the main reason for it is mostly just the depth, and there's a lot of unknowns right now with this secondary. But one guy that you don't really question about anything is Trey Roberson, who's going to be that elite boundary corner in the CFL. He returned to the Stampeders near the end of last season after a long stint in the NFL for a couple of years. When he was in the CFL in 2019, he was perhaps the most scary defensive back. He was just basically the guy that you just didn't throw the ball in his direction because he could take it and take it the other way. If he is even 90% of the player he was in 2019, quarterbacks better look out because Roberson is one of the best defensive playmakers in the league. And then Jonathan Moxey, a guy that's probably going to move over to the boundary side halfback position. He established himself as a full-time starter last season, which was highlighted by coming down with 3 interceptions in Calgary's playoff game versus Saskatchewan. I thought he looked pretty good all around last year, and it's going to be a solid veteran starter for this group. And then Raheem Wilson, a halfback who likes to play physical near the line of scrimmage. That's really what stands out to me about his game. He had some issues in coverage last year, often being targeted by the offense, but he had good games as well. So, I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag there for Raheem Wilson last year, but I think he's a solid starter and can continue to grow into that role with the Stampeders. And then Ali Buka, who is a Canadian defensive back who has seen starts with the Rough Riders over the last couple of seasons. This is a homecoming of sorts, as Buka attended the University of Calgary, and ultimately he is the most experienced Canadian defensive back on this team's roster after the trade of Royce Metchie this offseason. And then after that, you really have a lack of CFL experience among the rest of these guys. So starting with Marcellus Branch, a former player in the Spring League who played in Calgary's season opener last year, but unfortunately suffered a broken leg, so we didn't get to see too much of him. And then Javian Elliott, a former Florida State Seminole who has some starter NFL experience from his time with the Carolina Panthers. He played in last year's regular season finale for the Stampeders, but didn't really do anything else. And then Nick Stats, a Canadian guy here, a former Calgary Dino who contributed on special teams as a rookie. We'll see if he ever really breaks into a starting role or a rotational role on defense. Malcolm Lee, another Canadian guy here, a former 2019 5th-round pick who debuted last season. Lee played his youth sports football for the UBC Thunderbirds. And then Brad Muhammad, who played in 2021 with Ottawa and made a handful of starts where he didn't really stand out one way or the other in my opinion. But given the fact that Ottawa didn't want to keep him around despite their struggles, doesn't give me much confidence that Muhammad will make much of an impact with the Stampeders. So overall, pretty top-heavy defensive back room here, which is why it gets cracked down in the positional rankings. Now let's look at the rookies, which really could factor in heavily to this defensive back room this year. The first 3 guys here drafted in the most recent CFL draft: Roya, who is a 3rd-round pick out of Western Illinois; Shaquille St. Laud, who was a 7th-round pick that played for the University of Maine; and then 8th-round pick Daniel Omoko, who played for the York Lions. So we'll be interesting to see if any of those guys really make an instant impact as a rookie and make the opening day roster. And then Bailey Devine Scott, a global from Australia, who was the team's 3rd-round pick in this year's global draft. So we'll see if he can make an impact and make the roster as one of the global players. And then Natrell Jamerson, a former 5th-round pick of the New Orleans Saints in the NFL draft. He has 21 games of NFL experience. Titus Wall, he played 5 years of college football at Missouri State, so very experienced college player, but didn't really do much in terms of his NFL career. And then Kobe Williams, who played his college football at Arizona State. We'll see if he can make an impact here. Javian Hamilton attended training camp with the team last season and returns this year. Antonio Phillips, who previously spent time on the Houston Texans practice squad in 2021, so pretty recent experience there. And then Deontay Ruffin, a former standout at Western Kentucky. And then KJ Sales, who was last in pro football with the LA Chargers in 2021 during training camp. And then Darius Williams, the last guy here, originally under contract during the pandemic with the Stampeders and signed back with the team this offseason. So we'll see. This is a guy that the team had his eye on for a while, so we'll see if he can make an impact here. But overall, keep an eye on these rookies because I think 1 or 2 of these guys can make a big impact this year. Now moving on to special teams, and they are going to rank 2nd here in the CFL. And the reason for this is because I feel very confident in their kicking situations. I think Malik Henry is a pretty good return man, but what really puts this team up in this rankings is kicker Rene Paredes, the consistency that he's brought to the table year after year from a kicking standpoint, and then Cody Grace was, I believe, an all-star last year in the CFL as a punter, as a rookie as well. So one of the better global players in the league, even though he's a punter, and a lot of people like to poke fun at that, but he is one of the best global players in the league. So I think this is a really good special teams unit, and should be a strength of this team this year. So overall, when you grade all of those out, the Stampeders finished second overall on offense in the CFL in my rankings. But on defense, they slide to 6th, which is really influenced a lot by that defensive back ranking, which is only 7th. So, I mean, I think this is a really solid roster on both sides of the ball, and I think these rankings really reflect it. I think a lot of these teams across the CFL are very close, and I'm going to be saying that a lot of the time in this series. Now that we've talked about every player coming to camp for this roster, let's talk about the projected starters on offense. And I think the things that you want to pay attention to here, I mean, obviously, I want to explain that the asterisks mean that they're a Canadian player, and then when they don't have an asterisk, it's an American player. There's no global players really in the starting lineups for any team in the CFL, so that's not really a concern for our legend here. But there's also underlying players, which are the training camp battles going into this season in my mind, and where you really could see multiple players potentially start at that slot. I think the offensive line, like I said, is very set. I feel very confident those are going to be your 5 starters day 1 this year. I think Williams Lambert, Reggie Bagleton, Kamar Jordan, those 3 guys are for sure going to start. But I think the questions is really those Canadian spots. I think they're going to start 2 Canadians at receiver this year. It's possible that they only start 1, but I think that Sindani is going to start because he's a guy that they always seem to trust with this team, even though he's, like I said, not the highest upside option. I think Hunchak will finally get his start here in the starting lineup, but watch out for Luther Hagunavanu, who I think could easily start in either of those players' places. So, I mean, I think those are the spots where you're going to see a lot of training camp battles for the Stampeders on offense. Now, talking about defense, I think it's interesting because I think the main question here is the defensive line with Ademi Berglund. Do they start 2 Canadians on the defensive line, which has been a more and more popular option the last couple of years in the CFL? I think Ademi Berglund, he showed the potential, and I think he easily could be their starter there on the end opposite Lemon. And so I have him projected to be there, but I think depending on what they want to do with the ratio, if they only want to start 7 Canadian guys, that I think that he could potentially just be a rotational guy again in year 2. And then the other questions I really have, I think the linebacking core are really set in stone, but I think that defensive backroom, like I said, there's going to be a lot of competition for all those spots except for really Roberson, Wilson, and Moxie. So I think those are the areas where you can see a lot of training competitions for the Stampeders. Now moving on to my team award predictions, starting with most outstanding player. And I'm going to go with Bo Levi Mitchell because I'm just banking on a bounce back season this year with Reggie Bagleton back. I think he's going to have a much better season this year than he had shown in 2021, where he really just hit rock bottom for his CFL career. And then most outstanding defensive player, Jameer Thurman. I think he was my pick last year to win most outstanding defensive player for this team. I'm not too sure who actually was named most outstanding defensive player for the Stampeders last year, but I mean, I think Thurman, I feel confident in picking him again to win this. I think he is arguably their best player on the defensive side, other than maybe Mike Rose or Roberson on the corner. So I think that Thurman is a solid pick for most outstanding defensive player. And then most outstanding Canadian, kind of a dark throw, but I'm going with Cameron Judge in the linebacking core to have a big bounce back season this year. I think he's going to have a ton of tackles. And then most outstanding offensive lineman, I'm going with Derek Dennis, coming back to the CFL, playing that left tackle position. I think he's going to lock it down this year. Now, finally, let's get into the key question, and everybody knew what this one was going to be. Can Bo Levi Mitchell, quarterback, stay healthy after dealing with nagging injuries the last few seasons? And everything really depends on this for this team, even though I do believe that Jake Maier is going to be very good in this league, and I think he could potentially have a situation like we saw with Hamilton when Jeremiah Mazzoli goes down in 2019 and Dane Evans takes them still to the Grey Cup. I think that we could potentially see a scenario like that, but I think Bo Levi Mitchell still is going to be needed for them to beat Winnipeg in those big matchups, and I think that ultimately the Stampeders are going to need a healthy Bo Levi Mitchell this season. But with that said, that is going to be the end of my first roster review for the 2022 CFL season. Hopefully, once again, like I said, that whole player strike and CBA situation is really, rectified by the time people watch this video. But regardless, I had to get going with this series at some point, guys. I really appreciate everybody for checking it out. If you could do me a favor, just press like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, everybody. And with that said, I hope everyone enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.